We've been talking about Dogen Zenji's teachings on the 8 awarenesses of great beings. The 8 awarenesses of great beings were the teachings Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen, offered at the end of his life. And they mirror the teachings the Buddha offered at the end of his life. We've been speaking about these for a number of weeks, and today we're on the 8th one of the 8 awarenesses, which is not to be engaged in hollow discussions. Not to be engaged in hollow discussions. Before I dive in, I just recap the other 7. The first was having few desires. Next, knowing how much is enough. Knowing how much is enough. The third is enjoying serenity. The fourth is making diligent efforts. The fifth is not neglecting mindfulness. The sixth is practicing meditation. And the 7th, which we talked about last week, is cultivating wisdom. And today we're talking about not to be engaged in hollow discussions. Dogen Zenji teaches that all of the 8 are contained in each of the 8. If that makes sense to you, I'll just read that part. Disciples of the Tathagata unfailingly learn this instruction. Those who do not practice and learn it do not know it and are not the Buddha's disciples. It's the Tathagata's right Dharma eye treasury and the fine mine of awakening, of nirvana. Nevertheless, today many do not know it, and few have seen or heard it. It's due to the trickeries that they do not know. And those lacking in long accumulated good roots neither hear nor see the instruction. During the bygone days of the right Dharma, all disciples of the Buddha knew it. They practiced it and learned it in experience. Now there's not 1 or 2 among 1,000 monks who know the 8 truths of a great human being, or the 8 awarenesses of great beings. There is nothing even to compare to these times. While the Tathagata's right Dharma is now still permeating the great 1,000-fold world, while the Tathagata's right Dharma is now still permeating the great 1,000-fold world, while the immaculate Dharma has not yet disappeared, we should learn it without delay. Do not be slack or lazy. To meet the Buddha Dharma, even in countless kalpas, is hard. You may remember that a kalpa is limitless time. To meet the Buddha Dharma, even in countless kalpas, is hard. To receive a human body is also hard. Even in receiving the human bodies on the 3 continents are better. Human bodies who encounter the teachings of the Buddha are the best of all because they meet the Buddha, hear the Dharma, and attain the truth. People who died prior to hearing these 8 truths of a great human being we're not able to hear them, that we are now seeing them and hearing them, even today, that we are now seeing them and hearing them and learning them is due to long accumulated great roots. And learning them now, in developing them life by life, and arriving without fail at the supreme truth of Bodhi, and in preaching them for living beings, may we become the same as Shakyamuni Buddha. May there be no differences whatsoever. Having few desires, knowing how much is enough, enjoying serenity, making diligent efforts, not neglecting mindfulness, practicing meditation, cultivating wisdom, and not being engaged in idle discussions. These are the 8 awarenesses of great beings. They seem so easy on the surface when we hear about them. Oh, yeah, of course, that. Oh, yeah, that one. But practicing them and really engaging with them is what gives our practice life. This is how we wake up. So today I wanted to talk about not being engaged in hollow discussions. What is that? What is not being engaged in hollow discussions? It is the experience to experience realization and be free from discriminatory thinking. To experience realization and be free from discriminatory thinking with the thorough understanding of the reality of all things. How do we do that? Experience realization and be free from discriminatory thinking with the thorough understanding of the reality of all things. When we are free of discriminatory thinking, the reality of all things naturally appears. Dogen Zenji says, the 8th awakening is not to be engaged in hollow discussions. It is to experience realization and be free from discriminatory thinking with the thorough understanding of the reality of all things. It is called not to be engaged in hollow discussions. The Buddha said, monks, if you get into hollow discussions, your mind will be scattered. Then you will be unable to attain liberation, even if you've left the household. So you should immediately leave behind a scattered mind and hollow discussions. If you wish to attain the joy of serenity, you will need to cure the sickness of hollow discussions. This is called not to be engaged in hollow discussions. What is not to be engaged in hollow discussions? I was thinking of the koan from the Blue Cliff Record, the 71st koan, with the great teacher Hyakujo speaking to his disciple Gohol. And he said, with your mouth and lips closed, how would you say it? With your mouth and lips closed, how would you say it? Hollow discussions are discussions that are, wordy, lengthy, too many words. The more we talk, sometimes the further away from the truth we become. Of course, talking communicating with each other is necessary sometimes. But we can get into the habit of talking just to hear our own voices. Maybe that's, an expression that exaggerates a little bit. Maybe it's not just to hear our own voices, but that can become the effect of becoming engaged in hollow discussions. What it really means is, where's your mind? If your mind is scattered, or if we're too focused on ourselves, then our discussions naturally become wordy and hollow. They're just sounds. So, what are our discussions like when we're truly engaged? When our mind is quiet? When we're really listening? Today, I wanted to talk about this topic, not to be engaged in hollow discussions, on both an outer level and an inner level. Because as we are all aware, our inner discussions can be equally hollow and equally verbose. How many of your mind discussions can be loud sometimes and just a little bit too chatty? Yeah, please. You're so loud. Quiet down a little bit. When our mind is engaged in hollow discussions, it's really hard for us to take in the truth of the world around us. So this is the essence of this. This is what it is to experience realization or waking up and be free from the kind of thinking that discriminates. A scattered mind is sort of naturally drawn into these hollow discussions. And as our mind settles, as we practice following our breath, letting go, letting the thinking mind sink, then also our mind starts to settle with the breath. And as the mind settles, we can start to see clearly. Just like that common image of a pond that's churned up. And as the wind stills and there's no movement in the pond, the silt that's been stirred up can settle down. And we can begin to see clearly. What a relief. What a relief. As long as our mind is scattered, we will be unable to realize liberation. We need that concentrated mind, and we talked about this in Not Neglecting Mindfulness. Dogen Zenji says that all of these 8 are deeply connected with each of the other 8. Each, he says, each awakening contains all 8. Thus, there are 64 awakenings. When awakenings are practiced thoroughly, their number is countless. When they're practiced in summary, there are 64. So not being engaged in hollow discussions is connected to having few desires, to knowing how much is enough, to enjoying serenity, to making diligent efforts, to not neglecting mindfulness, practicing meditation, and cultivating wisdom. These all go together. They all help each other. They're dependent on each other, just like you and I are. My awakening is completely dependent on your awakening. When we're all in this together, then the need to speak, just to hear myself speak, starts to dissipate, because I very naturally want to hear more. Maybe not even just voices, maybe just the sounds of the world. the real sounds, the things beneath the words that people tell us every day in so many different ways. Engaging in hollow discussions is a kind of a sickness. A friend told me a story yesterday of being in a meeting and feeling frustrated because the meeting went long and she was tired. And yet there were important things the group needed to discuss. And in the middle of this, with all the people present in the meeting, all of them professors, one person had a lot to say. What he had a lot to say was something that doesn't even exist anymore. He was talking a lot about how the place where she works used to be 30 years ago, when a person who is no longer working there was in charge. Well, we used to do this and we used to do this. And in some ways, that can be important information if we get what we need from that information. But in this case, he was so engaged in his own voice that he didn't notice all of the other people in the room and even lost track of the agenda for the meeting and lost track of the humans who were living together with him, and thus lost track of his connection. And without that connection, the meeting wasn't able to go anywhere. It just languished. We all do this, right? We do it in so many different ways. We do it in so many different ways. We do it when we're walking around. We do it when we're on a hike. You know, sometimes I go on a hike most days, and sometimes I like listening to a podcast, which is an interesting thing to hear. Or sometimes I like to talk to my mom. On these days, it's a conscious decision to do so, but these are the days that I miss the sounds of the forest around me. When we're really listening to the forest, there's a lot to hear. Not just the things we think of, like the wind or the sound of the water. There's so much more. The whole forest is a system that's alive. And the better we listen, the better we hear. And I use the example of listening to a podcast or listening to my mom because that's an overt way that we can check out from the discussion. But the thing is, often when we're walking, we're so engrossed in our own thoughts that we also miss the discussion. We miss the sounds. When we're able to walk through life still, letting our mind settle, letting the discussions of our internal self settle, the hollow discussions, the wordy, verbose discussions. When we let that settle down, we can hear so much. Such a miracle. We feel so alive and so connected. At Beacon Zen on Friday mornings, we have a discussion every week. We started at the beginning of the pandemic and we've continued. Every Friday morning, we have a discussion and we choose a topic. Often the topic is a challenging topic. Maybe something we wouldn't talk about in a cafe, maybe with a good friend, but not in general, something hard for us to even acknowledge ourselves. Not always that hard, but often. And each of us takes a turn talking, and the instruction is while the person is talking, the only task the others have is to listen fully, completely. That's the task, the instruction. The instructions are very easy to understand, and in practice, quite challenging to do. Because what happens, as soon as the person starts talking, we start to think of what we want to say. And then it becomes all about me. Or maybe I'm nervous. Oh, my turn's going to come. I don't know I better plan out what I'm going to say. And just like that, straight out of the moment. And I've missed half of my friend's story. A story that I really wanted to hear. A story full of beauty and vulnerability, sometimes struggle, sometimes open questions. This is what happens in the whole world when we're engaged in hollow discussions. Whether we're engaged in those out loud, just talking with no deeper meaning, or whether we're engaged in those inside. To experience realization and be free from discriminatory thinking with the thorough understanding of the reality of all things. The thorough understanding of the reality of all things naturally arises when we become free from discriminatory thinking. The Buddha gives us some good guidelines. As you might remember, the guidelines for right speech are, is this the right time to say it? Is it true? Am I speaking gently in a way they can hear and not harshly? Is it necessary or beneficial to say? And finally, do I speak with a kind heart and not inwardly malicious? I'll repeat those. Is it the right time? Is it true? Do I speak gently and not harshly? Is it necessary or beneficial? And do I speak with a kind heart and not inwardly malicious? We can apply right speech to ourselves as well as the way we talk to others. With your mouth and your lips closed, how would you say it? I want to shift a little bit toward listening and the way that letting go of hollow discussions allows us to open. Sometimes we use hollow words to hide from things. I think we all know what that is. Sometimes you have this whole conversation with somebody and blah, 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 blah. And it goes on. And right as you leave, you get ready to leave. Maybe you've even, if you're at dinner, you've paid the check, you're standing up, you're at the door, your hand's on the door. And then what you really needed to say comes out. What are we using our hollow words to hide from? And what might it be like if we were allowed to let go of the chatter externally and internally? To become still and to pay attention. When we're paying attention only to ourselves, which is the essence of being engaged in hollow discussions, we can't take in the world around us, not just verbally. There are so many ways to hear. The Bodhisattva, Kannon Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva of compassion, also called Avalokiteshvara, is the Bodhisattva who sees the cries of the world, who sees the cries of the world. How do we see the cries? This Bodhisattva, in the one that has 1,000 arms, each hand has an eye in it. We can see the cries of the world when we let go of the internal chatter. We can see clearly when we let go of our discomfort, which is, of course, centered around me, my discomfort, my story. We can see the world around us when we let go of our need to blame or to put things on others. When we truly listen, what can we notice? When our mind is still, we notice the movement of the person in the room, maybe out of our peripheral vision. We notice something is not okay with them. And because our mind is still, we can take in that information and respond appropriately. When our mind is still, we notice when people are engaged with us. We notice when we're talking too much, because what we're doing is paying attention to somebody else's body language. Going back to the example of the guy in the meeting, if he had been engaged with the people around, I imagine he might have noticed signs like this. Or maybe people not looking. Maybe a sigh. Maybe a blank stare. Maybe anger, frustration, maybe patience, but not heart-to-heart engagement. When we let go of the chatter, heart-to-heart engagement becomes possible. We know what this is. We've experienced it in different ways. Think about when you're driving your car. And when you're a teenager and learning to drive, or if you're a New Yorker and you're 45 years old and learning to drive, then you are nervous. And everything is hard. And there's so much coming in. You're like, oh my God, I have to turn on the blinker. And I hope there's a parking space. I don't remember how to I'm going to have to do that. And everyone's going to watch me. And okay. And your driving is really erratic. But as you do it and become engaged, very naturally, when you're on the road, your vision starts to open and you take in the world around you. Something up there on the right of the highway catches your eye just a little bit, and you take in that it's the eyes of an animal shining at you at night, and you need to slow down. Something internally, because you are so conditioned to looking in the mirror and seeing behind you, feels the person coming up behind you and takes care. This is how we are with each other as well. When we're truly engaged, when we're paying attention to each other, we notice what needs to be noticed, and we stop centering ourselves. There's no need to blame, because there's nothing to blame. There's no one to blame. There's no need to posture or put ourselves up because we care about connecting. And this is the essence of this. Not being engaged in hollow discussions is about connecting in the world. Connecting is the essence of waking up, or in other words, awakening to the truth that we are interconnected is the essence of waking up. And we can't do this when our minds or our mouths are loud. This is what our practice has to show us. It allows us to settle through following the breath. Once our minds are settled, we're better able to engage with the world around us. When we engage, when we truly meet each other heart to heart, free from the chatter, this is realization. This is freedom from discriminatory thinking. This is the thorough understanding of the reality of all things. With your mouth and your lips closed, how would you say it?